Okay, so you know how sometimes a country gets hit with like a label
Mm.
and it kind of sticks no matter what?
Mhm.
We're going to dive into one of those today. Eritrea,
Oh, yeah.
often called Africa's North Korea.
Yeah.
But like, what's the reality behind that comparison? Like, is it really that bad? We're going to try to figure that out using this UN Human Rights Council report.
Yeah, this isn't like just some boring report with a bunch of numbers and stuff.
Right.
It's actually based on like real stories from Eritreans themselves.
Wow.
People who have lived through whatever's happening in Eritrea.
Yeah, because Eritrea's government isn't exactly known for being open and honest or letting people see what's going on, right?
Right.
So this report is important, and honestly, it's pretty disturbing. Today we're going to focus on the parts that really got to us, especially what it means to be a woman in Eritrea.
Yeah. One thing that really struck me is how this report goes beyond just like general statements.
Oh, okay.
It really gets into how the government controls everything and what the consequences of those policies are, especially for women.
So let's give everyone a little context, right? Eritrea became independent back in 91.
Mm-hmm.
Big celebrations, hope for the future, the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it's been a one-party state ever since, led by the same president, who's not exactly a fan of Western democracy, let's just say.
Yeah. Critical might be putting it mildly.
Right.
And this UN report,
Yeah.
it does not hold back.
Really?
Oh, no. These investigators, they talked to tons of people,
Wow.
both inside and outside of Eritrea.
Okay.
They weren't just fed some made-up version of events, you know.
Right.
They got the real deal.
Wow. And that's probably where that Africa's North Korea comparison comes in, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it starts to make you wonder
Yeah.
when you really get into it.
So one of the biggest things that stood out was this whole national service program in Eritrea.
Oh, yeah.
On paper, it's supposed to be 18 months, men and women, all equal, a patriotic duty.
Right.
But that's not how it actually works, is it?
It's like they took the idea of national service and then just like twisted it. You know,
Right.
you go in thinking, okay, I'm going to serve my time, then go back to my life.
Yeah.
But for a lot of Eritreans, that just doesn't happen.
So they're just stuck.
They're stuck for years, sometimes even decades,
No way.
trapped in this system of indefinite conscription.
Indefinite being the key word there.
Exactly.
Wow. So the report actually talks to people who have been forced to work on construction sites, farms, even in government offices.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah, and they're still technically conscripted.
Still conscripting, can you imagine?
With pay.
Oh, please, don't even get me started. It's basically an insult.
So it's basically forced labor.
That's what it is. A captive workforce.
And the conditions these people have to endure are just horrific. Inadequate food, non-existent sanitation, healthcare. That's a joke, and that's putting it lightly.
It's awful.
And some of the testimonies even talk about people dying during training.
What?
With absolutely zero accountability.
They just die.
It's like their lives don't even matter.
And if you think, well, just leave, that's not exactly an option either.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Leaving legally is practically impossible.
Next to and fleeing.
Oh, that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
The report talks about the risks people take trying to escape, often with tragic consequences.
It's just all of it. It's just wrong.
It's inhumane.
This report doesn't just talk about policies.
No, it doesn't.
It shows the real human cost of all of this, especially for women. That's where this whole double burden thing comes in, right?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine
Yeah.
dealing with the forced labor, the terrible conditions, and then on top of all that, facing a whole other level of abuse just because you're a woman.
And the report, it doesn't shy away from those details?
Not at all. It talks about how women are often forced into domestic work for high-ranking officials.
Like cooking and cleaning and stuff?
Cooking, cleaning, childcare, everything.
Wow.
Basically unpaid domestic labor on top of their other duties.
Which is horrible enough.
Tell me about it.
But it gets worse, doesn't it? The report says many of these women are pressured to have sex with their superiors.
It's sickening, honestly.
Yeah, and if they refuse...
Punishment.
It's just, the power dynamics there are just... It's unthinkable.
It's exploitation, plain and simple.
Yeah.
And the saddest part is how it affects these women even after they're released.
So it follows them.
It's like this dark cloud that hangs over them.
The report uses the term brutal cycle, and I'm starting to see why women who get pregnant during their service are often pressured to get abortions.
And if they refuse, they're ostracized, denied support.
It's like they're punished for the system that's already victimizing them.
It's messed up, right?
Yeah.
Many of them are left so vulnerable. Some are forced to turn to prostitution just to survive.
And it's not just the women, is it?
No, it's not.
Their families are targeted too, right?
It's this whole tactic of collective punishment.
But like if you run away, your family pays the price.
Exactly.
Sure.
It's how they maintain control.
So if someone listening to this has a brother or a father or a husband who flees,
They could be detained, extorted, left completely defenseless.
and again, women are often the most affected by this.
Always.
It's like a nightmare you can't wake up from.
It is a nightmare,
And speaking of nightmares, we haven't even gone to Eritrea's prison system.
which is somehow even worse.
Really?
This is where the UN reports attention to detail is crucial.
Okay.
Because in Eritrea, prison isn't about justice.
Then what's it about?
It's about silencing anyone who dares to disagree.
Yeah.
It's like people just vanish into thin air.
So they get arrested. But for what?
Arrested is putting it mildly. It's more like they disappear.
Yeah.
No charges, no trial, families left completely in the dark sometimes for years.
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 Wow. Not knowing.
Hmm.
That's got to be the worst part.
It's torture for the families.
So if there is some kind of official reason given,
Mhm.
what are these supposed crimes? Like, what are we actually talking about here?
Crimes according to the Eritrean government,
Right.
which is a joke because often it's nothing even remotely close to a crime.
So, like, what?
Saying something the government doesn't like.
Like criticizing the government.
Exactly. Even online.
No.
Or having books or movies they don't approve of.
That's insane.
That's enough to disappear you into one of these secret prisons.
Okay, that's terrifying.
It's incredibly messed up.
So I hate to even ask this, but we both know it's coming, the prison conditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brace yourself.
The report doesn't sugarcoat it, does it?
Not even a little bit.
So,
Honestly, some of the details are just horrific.
yeah.
It's hard to even read about it, let alone imagine what it must be like to go through it.
Yeah.
Torture is routine.
Like what? What kind of torture?
Oh, the usual.
No.
Beatings, starvation, being forced into painful positions for days on end.
That's barbaric.
Like something out of the Middle Ages.
You mentioned psychological torture, too.
Right? And that's where it gets really devious.
Devious how?
They use sleep deprivation, mock executions, forcing prisoners to watch other people being tortured.
Oh, my God.
Sometimes even their own family members.
That's just evil.
Pure evil.
The psychological trauma from that has to be.
Incalculable.
Yeah.
And on top of all that, the report documents the use of gender-based torture.
So torture specifically designed to target women.
Yeah.
What does that even look like?
It's about breaking them down completely, body, mind, and spirit.
God.
We're talking sexual assault, rape as punishment, things that target their reproductive health.
It's barbaric.
It's just, I don't even have words. It's like we're talking about some dystopian novel, not real life.
And then you add in the enforced disappearances.
Right, so not just being detained, but just vanishing.
Gone without a trace.
So families have no idea where their loved ones are if they're even still alive.
The not knowing is a form of torture in itself.
It's a way to silence everyone, not just the person who disappeared.
Absolutely. It creates a climate of fear.
So after reading all this, it's hard to imagine how anyone could ever be held accountable. It seems impossible, right?
Yeah.
But that's exactly what this UN report is calling for.
Really?
Accountability.
But how do you even begin to hold an entire government accountable when it seems like they can just do whatever they want?
It's a question the report wrestles with.
So do they have an answer?
They acknowledge that Eritrea's justice system is deeply flawed.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's kind of an understatement.
It's completely intertwined with the government. It's supposed to hold accountable.
Right.
So they call for international pressure sanctions against specific individuals, investigations by the International Criminal Court, things like that.
Okay, so outside pressure.
It's a start, at least.
It's going to be a tough road, though, right?
Oh, definitely.
One thing I found interesting and kind of disturbing was how the report gets into Eritrea's finances.
Or lack thereof, you mean.
Right, like the lack of transparency.
There's a whole section on it,
Is there?
highlighting how difficult it is to track where the money goes in that country.
So shady dealings, basically.
Raises serious questions about corruption, about those in power lining their own pockets while the people suffer.
The classic story. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer.
And in this case, the poor are forced into labor to enrich the already wealthy.
It's sickening.
It really is.
So we've got a broken justice system, a government that refuses to change, a culture of fear and silence, and now this whole financial aspect on top of it all. Where do you even begin to unravel something like that?
It's overwhelming.
Wow.
Well, but it starts with acknowledging the truth of what's happening.
Bringing it into the light.
Exactly. This report shines a light into a very dark corner of the world, and that's always the first step.
So awareness can lead to action
That's the idea.
because it's easy to feel powerless in the face of this kind of stuff.
Oh, for sure.
But even small things can make a difference, right?
Absolutely.
So like what can someone listening to this actually do?
Stay informed,
Right.
talk to people about it, support organizations that are working to help the Eritrean people.
Like donate to charities and stuff.
Exactly. Or write to your elected officials,
Yeah.
urge them to take a stronger stance.
So make our voices heard
Exactly. It's about refusing to look away.
because silence equals complicity.
It does.
We've talked a lot about the Eritrean government's role in all of this, but are there other factors at play here? External things that might be contributing to this whole situation?
100%. To understand Eritrea today, you have to understand its past.
Like what?
They fought a long and brutal war for independence from Ethiopia.
Right.
And that experience has shaped their national identity,
Okay.
created this us against the world mentality that the government has exploited to stay in power.
So they use the threat of an outside enemy to justify what they're doing internally.
Exactly.
Wow.
And then there are the sanctions,
Right, because the UN has imposed sanctions on Eritrea.
citing human rights abuses and their alleged support of certain groups in the region.
Which the Eritrean government claims is unfair and a form of Western imperialism.
Of course.
And they use those sanctions to justify their isolationist policies.
Which only strengthens their control.
And makes it even harder for outside information to get in.
Exactly.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is. Breaking it requires a multi-pronged approach.
Okay, so what does that look like?
It requires international pressure,
Right.
but it also requires supporting and amplifying the voices of ordinary Eritreans who are risking their lives to fight for change from within.
Because there are people like that, right? Eritreans who are working to make things better.
Absolutely.
What are they doing?
You're organizing, speaking out, documenting the abuses, even though it could get them killed.
Oh, they're incredibly brave.
They are the true heroes of this story.
And their stories deserve to be heard.
They do.
Yeah.
Because amidst all the darkness detailed in this report, there are flickers of hope.
So there's hope for Eritrea.
There's always hope. There's the resilience of the human spirit, the courage of those who refuse to be silenced, the unwavering belief that even in the darkest of times, change is possible.
We've covered some really heavy stuff today.
Yeah, no kidding.
It really makes you question humanity sometimes.
It does.
But even with all this darkness, this report does offer like a sliver of hope.
Okay.
Or at least a path toward justice, right?
Right.
Because it actually hints at ways to hold those responsible accountable.
Mm.
What really struck me was how the report like meticulously lays out this case for potential crimes against humanity.
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about human rights violations.
You're right.
But this report goes further.
Yeah.
It's saying that Eritrean officials could actually be held accountable under international law.
Wow.
We're not talking about just like a slap on the wrist here.
Right.
This is the big leagues. Enslavement, imprisonment, torture, murder, enforced disappearances.
So they're saying that these aren't just isolated incidents.
Right. They're saying it's systematic.
Well-
Part of a deliberate attack on the Eritrean people.
And that's a really important distinction, isn't it?
Huge.
Because it opens up possibilities that wouldn't be there otherwise,
Like what?
like prosecution.
Exactly.
So they could actually face trial for this.
Potentially, yeah.
Wow.
Well, the report talks about something called universal jurisdiction.
Never heard of it.
It basically means that some countries have laws that allow them to prosecute people for crimes against humanity no matter where they happened.
Really? So even if it happened in Eritrea?
Even then.
Wow. So someone who commits these atrocities in Eritrea, they could be arrested and put on trial somewhere else.
That's the idea.
That's amazing.
And the report really pushes for countries to use this principle.
That's kind of a big deal, huh?
It is. They also mentioned the International Criminal Court as a possibility.
But Eritrea isn't a part of the ICC, are they?
They're not.
So how would that even work?
Well, the ICC can investigate and prosecute crimes in non-member states under certain conditions.
Like what?
Like if the UN Security Council gets involved and refers the situation to the court.
So it's a long shot.
It is a long shot.
But still, even if it's a long shot, even if no one ends up in court tomorrow, just the fact that this report exists, that it names names,
Huge.
it has to have some kind of impact.
It does. It puts those in power on notice.
Like, we're watching you.
Exactly. They can't pretend they don't know what's going on anymore.
Because what happens in the dark always comes to light, right?
That's right.
And this report is shining a giant spotlight.
And that's why it's so important,
Because
because it's not just about the legal stuff.
Well-
It's about giving a voice to those who have been silenced.
the victims.
Yes, and it demands that the world finally pays attention.
It's a call to action.
Exactly.
And not just for governments and the UN and stuff,
Right.
but for everyone.
It's a call to each of us to do something.
So what can we do?
Stay informed, talk about it, support organizations that are helping the Eritrean people.
Like we talked about before.
Exactly. Contact your elected officials, make some noise.
Because silence is not an option.
Silence equals complicity.
We can't claim ignorance anymore.
Oh.
We have to decide where we stand.
And what we're willing to do about it.
This report, it's not an easy read, but it's an important one.
Absolutely.
It's a wake-up call about how fragile human rights really are.
And how important it is to fight for them.
Every single day.
Everywhere.
This deep dive into Eritrea has been eye-opening, to say the least.
It really has.
We want to encourage all of you to take a look at the sources we've talked about, keep learning, and find your own ways to make the world a more just and equitable place.
Because we all have a role to play.
Thanks for listening, everyone.